It's hard to believe that a place as beautiful as this could be the site of this incredibly cruel blood sport. Animals have been an essential part of my art practice since the mid-1980s. I spent the first few years of my undergraduate degree not sure what subject matter I wanted to be working with. And then a series of dreams, actually at the time I was into Jungian psychology and recording my dreams, and I suddenly realised that they were completely populated with animals, including an extraordinary dream that I can remember that was really crucial in all of this, where in my dream I was holding this giant black cat, like a big sort of panther, and I'm sort of struggling with this giant black cat. And the next thing in my dream, it's not actually an animal anymore, it's a sign with the animal on it. And I remember sitting in the cinema trying to make sense of this dream and going, it's a sign. It's a sign. It was like my subconscious going, excuse me, you know that thing about animals? Here's a sign. Do you want a sign? And I was just like, oh yeah. Always been an animal lover. Drew horses, read books about animals. My nickname in primary school was the naturalist. And yet, for several years, didn't consider it worthy subject matter for my artwork. So the Offering series is a series of portraits of farm animals, a cow, a pig, a sheep and a chicken, painted in my blood on white linen tea towels. At the time I was working with portraits of rescued farm animals at Brightside Farm Sanctuary just outside of Hobart. And I'd already used Lola, Tuk Tuk, Miriam and Fudge in a couple of other works that were combining my features with theirs. And I started to think about the fact that we call these domestic animals, and the idea of domesticity and kitchens sort of rolled into this idea of how these animals' bodies are present in our kitchens. Well, not mine, but in most people's. When people are cooking, they're often wiping their hands on the tea towel, and so you get these traces of the blood on that. And that's where I came up with the idea of tea towels, because it's another thing that we would find in a kitchen. And I'd thought about using animal blood, and then I just couldn't think of a way of doing that ethically. I couldn't think of a way of capturing the blood, even if I got it from a butcher. None of it sat comfortably with me. And then I just thought, why not use my own blood? At the time I was showing with a little commercial gallery in Hobart, and the owner of the gallery happened to be a doctor. So it was very convenient to be able to go to my gallerist and say, hey Michael, I've got this crazy idea for some artworks, would you take my blood for them? So he did it for me, so yeah. You approach it almost like you would any other watercolour, where you're going to start pretty light. You're going to start with your light to mid-tones and then get darker as you go on, so that you start to, reveal the image subtly at first. When you're in the middle of it, you stop thinking about it as blood. It's just, you're just working on how to manage your materials to get the tonal differences that you're looking for, so that you're describing the form and texture of the animal's wool or feathers or whatever it might be. I had people asking me, especially people who are buying them, asking me about this. How archival is the blood? Like, is it going to last? Is it going to fade? In my mind, I was thinking, well, I know damn well when I've accidentally got blood on things, it's just very hard to get out. Over time, it browns off, like it oxidises, and it goes from sort of initially being quite bright red to being sort of a much duller brown. And so when people first look at them, they don't realise it's blood. And it's only when they read the wall label, or they're talking to me about it, that they find out that it's my blood. And their instant reaction is generally one of some kind of level of, I don't know, it's a bit abject. Like it takes them by surprise. And I think it makes people uncomfortable, which is exactly what I was hoping for. There's a lot of work that humans do in denying the material qualities of meat. They're very good at making it very abstract. When you look at this very sweet portrait of an animal staring straight back at you, and then you're confronted with the fact that it's done in the blood of the artist, it doesn't take too much to work out that there's a reason for those two things to be brought together. When I went out and took photographs of the various animals, Fudge was a no-brainer that she had to be one of the subjects. She was one of Emma's absolute favourites and such a character. She was a complete sweetheart. You give her a big belly rub and she'd roll over, and gentle, gentle thing she was.
And hello. Where are you going? Oh.
So when I was out at Emma's taking photographs of the animals, my number one aim was to get them front on, looking at me. I have no idea how many photographs I took, and not just of Lola and Tuk Tuk and Fudge and Miriam, of so many different cows and chicken and sheep and pigs. And in the end, it was choosing the photograph that was doing exactly that, looking straight at the viewer, front on. Because it was really important that the viewer is confronted by these animals looking back, that they're not objectified, that they are present and there's a sense of their agency in this. We think about farm animals as this collective rather than individuals, but anybody who spent time with individuals, people who think chickens are stupid and sheep are stupid, if you choose to spend time with them as individuals, they've got so much more going on than people give them credit for. Brightside is the opposite of going inside any factory farm. There's a lot of extremely well cared for, utterly adored animals who you know are going to go on to live a long life. I have to say that for people who are running animal sanctuaries though, it's really tough, because you know that for every animal you've been able to rescue, there are so many more you can't, because there is a limit to your resources. So those who do end up somewhere like Brightside are truly the lucky ones, and it's very rare.
Good girl. Oh, both paws.
What about the other paw? The other paw?
Oh, all the paws. This is very exciting.
During my undergraduate degree, there wasn't a single art theory or history lecture that ever touched on animals as subject matter. They just weren't considered worthy subject matter for so many years, and in fact the history of animals as subject matter is they're always seen as lesser. This is in Western art. If you took on a role as an animal painter, then you were seen as not being sort of doing work as important as human portraits or whatever it might be at the time. Pre-photography, and particularly once animal agriculture and animal breeding became really big, say in the 18th, 19th century, artists were, people like George Stubbs, would be commissioned to paint portraits of these animals, but as property. So they were there kind of, they stood in for it as a form of advertising. You know, here's a beautiful example of this racehorse who you might then want to breed from. I have always been really enamoured of the work of a Dutch 17th century painter called Paulus Potter. And his paintings of cows in particular, but also other animals, are extraordinary.
each of those animals has so much personality. He died really young, and there's not a huge amount known about him, but there's something incredibly affecting, and having seen a number of his works in the flesh now, they still carry that really strong sense of individual animal personalities in them. But you can also tell he's someone who lived with those animals. Like, he knew them. You just get a sense of that. Now, the agriculture means that animals are mostly kept out of our lives, other than on the plate that people sit down to eat their flesh. They have virtually nothing to do with those animals' lives. So this is the farm in Campania, which is just out of Hobart, that was a meat chicken farm that started the whole Animal Factories project off. It was an Ingham's meat chicken factory farm that I went into with some other activists. These sheds were what I saw as I walked back out that night. That made me just think, you look at that and you think you'd have no idea. If you didn't know, you'd have no idea what was contained within those sheds. That there were tens of thousands of chickens in those sheds, and that's where their short lives were lived. Because when I walked out of that farm, having been exposed to the multi-sensory, awful experience of being inside the shed, as we walked back out in the early hours of the morning, I looked down at these rows of shed lit by the external spotlights and thought, it's incredible. There's absolutely no sign that any animal lives inside those sheds. You can't hear anything. There's not so much as a feather outside. When you first go into a factory farm, it's a bit like the first time I went to the opening of duck shooting season. The shock doesn't hit you until sort of later somehow. Like, you're in there, you've got this task to do, and you're just fully focused on having to deal with the task at hand. Whether it's rescuing ducks, whether it's documenting what's going on in this farm, you've got a limited amount of time, you're there with a small group of people. The farmer can walk in at any time. If you found filming, it's all over. So you just kind of really task focused, and then it hits you afterwards with this kind of like shock of emotion. It's when you leave that those images don't leave your head. You can see any number of photographs, but it's a multi-sensory experience, of course. It's the smell of it as well is so powerful. Years later, when I went into a meat chicken shed, which was behind the factory that was just outside of Hobart, the smell of ammonia just hit me. It was just so strong because it was just a sea of white bodies, and in the meat chicken farm, they would have been kind of getting close to slaughter time. So they were just there, like just crushed en masse. And there was the warmth of the bodies, there's the sound of the chickens, there's this intense smell. Like, it's quite an intense experience. Once you realise, you can't drive past those buildings again without thinking about who is in there. So Duck Lake project took place in 2016 on the morning of the opening of the duck shooting season at Malting Lagoon on the east coast of Tasmania. And it was a performance on a floating stage on the lagoon of dancers in hot pink tutus and hot pink camo performing to a specially choreographed routine based on the music from Swan Lake. The colour theme behind Duck Lake, which was the hot pink and which was persistent through everything we did, had two purposes. One was that as the shooters shoot in hides so that they're hidden from the ducks, we wanted to be as visible as possible. But it was also about countering the hypermasculinity
of the whole thing about duck shooting, so that we were doing this thing that was kind of, taking hot pink as a kind of a sort of a feminist fuck you to the shooters. Disco Inferno depicts Molting Lagoon up on the east coast of Tasmania, which is the main public wetland that's used by duck shooters. It's a Ramsar listed wetland of high conservation value, but 3 months of the year duck shooters shoot from hides on the lagoon. And the painting depicts those hides being set on fire. So all of these little fires that you can see in the original photograph that the painting is based on were little hides dotted around the lagoon. And a few years ago, we went up at the opening of duck shooting season to discover that some legend had burned down all the hides. And so I just thought, well, can't be photographed, but I could do a painting of it. Because the ducks are sensitive to unusual movement, if they saw a shooter just standing out in the wetland, they'd be much less likely to come close. So they'll set out a whole pile of decoys around their hide often as well to attract the ducks, because it's when the ducks are going to fly down to the decoys, for example, they're low enough to shoot. But they're not going to come close if they see someone waving a gun around or something they're not used to. So the shooters basically are hidden in the hides from the ducks.
Breakfast with Rick Goddard.
It's duck hunting season at the moment. Last week we heard that either anti-duck hunting activists or possibly residents had set fire to a number of hides at Molting Lagoon. Yvette Watt is an anti-duck hunting activist, amongst other things, also an artist. Hi, Yvette.
Hi, Rick. How are you going?
You would like to see duck hunting banned, presumably.
You know, there's really no social licence, I don't think, for duck shooting anymore. Aerial surveys of the eastern coast have shown a steady decline in water birds over the 35 plus years of those surveys. And the 900-odd registered duck shooters in Tasmania self-report shooting between 35 and 40,000 birds every year.
Oh, that's a huge number, isn't it? Yvette, thanks for speaking with us this morning.
You can see how the high vis stands out just for miles, like the pink and it's just so against the kind of the other colours. It's just so, and that's the thing, like you'd have people over the years, like across the lagoon, like miles away, sort of out there, sort of, you know, waded out against sort of the hides. And you just see these little kind of bright little spots of pink all through the lagoon. And people in kayaks, you know, waving their flags around, and you can see them for miles. You know that inevitably the best you can do is to wave your flags and deter ducks, but you will end up seeing ducks shot, and it's awful. So yeah, it's fantastic. It's just so peaceful by comparison to past years. Hit by lightning, one after the other. It's great.
Me, big hunter. Ads. One occupied hide, how's that?
Amazing. And that shot that we heard them let off, I don't think they actually shot anything, because if they had, you see feathers all around.
Well,
There was no feathers.
could have been claiming territory, just telling us
Yeah.
they're here.
So see those decoys he's got set? These are mountain ducks, and he's got what look like grey teal decoys further out. There's hardly any hides still remaining, very few shooters, but also there's just no ducks. Even though you kind of know that recreational duck shootings continue on private property, you have to kind of really embrace the change that you see here and go, it's a sign that persistence pays off. Like, it's the work of a lot of people over a long period of time, just not giving up, and it pays off eventually.
You are? Okay, let's go.
Too far. Cheers to 10 years of Duck Lake and many more decades of endless activism on the lagoon. I got home and I found a little card from the police in my door frame, and my thinking was, oh, maybe the neighbours have been broken into or something. Anyway, I call the number as it requests me to, and this guy's like, yeah, we've got a charge laid against you. He said, it's a weird one, I've never seen one like this before. It's for erecting a dance floor. And this police guy was just like, I don't know what the hell this is about. Like, he was incredulous. He just seemed to think it was the most ridiculous thing. Anyway, so yeah, Parks and Wildlife took their time, but eventually charged me. The technical kind of charge was not complying with authority or something. I can't even remember now, but, you know, essentially erecting a dance floor on the lagoon. And then in June, when the case went up, we had a big crew of people in the original costumes and the tutus and things, a big people on the court steps. It was all thrown out of court. We were all so delighted that we all went and got completely smashed and sang karaoke until the early hours of the morning.